What's up, friends, and welcome back to the show. Today's episode might be one of those episodes that we look back to in a couple of years and say, we were right. We were early and we were right, because Dr. Kayla might just be a world changer. Quite literally. She's trying to change the world for women. That would change the world for men. It would change the world for all of us. And her backstory is fascinating, how she got here. So she worked with the CDC on public health initiatives that they were rolling out across the world. And she started to see that these were beneficial for men, but not for women. And when she questioned why, she started to dig into the science, only to realize that the science for women is basically non-existent. Also, our workplaces don't take into account environments for women to honor their cycle, to live in a patriarchal system that was built not because it's malevolent or not because it's bad, but just because that's the way evolution has steered us up until this point. And that female physiology, women's health, is far more complex, and learning more about it, doing better science, doing better public health initiatives around this will not only improve the lives of women everywhere, but will help us all thrive. Better collective environments, happier relationships, healthier reproductivity, and so much more. Fascinating conversation. Let's get into it with Dr. Kayla Osterhoff. Dr. Kayla, welcome in. I have been very excited for this conversation because I became aware of your work maybe a couple of months ago, and I've just been consuming and thinking about it, and I've been challenged by it in the best way because I am from Mars, as you would say, in this old trope of women are from Venus, men are from Mars. And you had this line that, women are a different person almost every week of the month. And your whole work about bringing more awareness to that is really fascinating. So is it true? Are men from Venus and women from Mars? Are we that different?
We're definitely that different. Whether we're from those planets or not, I cannot confirm or deny. But the point is, we are completely different organisms. And the fact that the world is just now starting to acknowledge that is both exciting and kind of scary.
Yeah. So from a super high level, what you're really bringing a ton of awareness to is that most of the advice, the science, the studies that we've got are almost solely conducted on men, and they've tried to kind of transport those results onto women by just saying basically that women are little men, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, and it's really kind of sad how things have evolved with such a very strong male bias. But I don't think it's malicious, and I think it makes sense how we got to where we are, but it is not an excuse for us to move forward with these unethical, misguided practices that really harm women. We are starting to understand the female body now in a way that we have never understood before. And we're starting to understand that the female body is so different and much, much more complex than the male biological systems. And with that acknowledgement, we can look at our systems and our structures and the way that we're doing research and the current data that exists and the policies and the protocols and even the innovation in health. And we can start to kind of dismantle some of that existing male bias by inserting now these new aspects that we're understanding and knowing and starting to create new structures that are truly inclusive of the female body, the female needs, the female perspective.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Why don't you think it's happened sooner?
Well, let's take a little history detour.
Please.
Just for folks to understand what the current environment and landscape is and how we got here. So to really understand it, we have to go way, way, way back to the age of agriculture, where we started to stay and settle in places. That was the beginning. That was the first tiny spark of modern society, and it was the first spark of our current economy and economic systems that we have. And everything's been built around that. So when folks started to settle, that was dependent on land and growing crops and being able to sustain communities with what they could grow on the land. And what happened at that time is that property rights became the first kind of part of the economy and became the first properties. And those properties had to be put under the ownership or name of somebody. And that just so happened to go under the ownership of the men who were working the fields, right? Because at that time, most of the women were more in the home environment, and the men were out doing more of the labor with the actual land. And so the land rights went into the male names at that point. As things progressed, couple thousand years later, we went into the age of enlightenment, and that's kind of the age of scientific inquiry, where everything began. And that's when universities started to pop up. That's when we started the idea of modern science and research and data, and started questioning our environments around us, and started to study to try to understand our body's health, the world, how things work. And at that point, it was still mostly men that were operating in these environments. They were the teachers, they were the students, they were the ones who were mostly active within that world. And so they were the ones asking questions, they were the ones studying, they were the ones collecting the data, they were the ones building the research protocols and strategies, and they were the ones teaching and creating the research institutions and education institutions and all of that, right? It was mostly led by men. There were a few women there, but the vast majority was men. Then we fast forward from that time into the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is what was the birth of our modern economy in its full form of what it is today. And that also set for our society, which is still maintained today, our priorities, which was productivity, which is productivity. Productivity is the goal, is the intention, is what it's all about. And still at that point, when this was birthed into the world, it was mostly men that were working in the factories, working in the technologies and innovations, working in the economy, in the places where money was being used and traded and valued and all of that, right? And then a couple hundred years later, once this came to its full fruition, we went into the World War era. And that was only about 100 years ago now, which is a blip in this entire thousands and thousands of year timeline that we're talking about, of all these systems being built. Only about 100 years. This was the first real entrance of women into these spaces. And that was necessitated by the world wars, where we needed more workers. And so women started to step into the workforce at that point. As women made their way into the workforce, they realized, oh, wow, this is a place that I also want to be and where I can contribute. And it was in a very exciting time. This was like the birth of feminism in a lot of ways. And female rights started to come into fruition at this point. And at this point, women started to actively participate more in the economy, instead of more passively, how it was in the past. So we're only talking about 100 years ago in thousands of years of progression and structures being built and policies being put into place and science being conducted and understanding being made and education being given, which was all very much centered around the male experience, the male needs, the male data, the male perspectives, right? And that all makes total sense because it was mostly men in these spaces up till this point. But that is not the current reality. And things have evolved so fast now. And so we have to catch up. And one of the biggest mistakes that we made is when this shift was happening, we didn't accommodate the shift by trying to understand what the needs of this population are, to try to understand how things work in this body, to try to understand these perspectives, to also try to understand what these gifts and strengths are, because they are very different.
Yeah.
What we did instead, because it's full steam ahead and we've got to get productivity on the road, we can't slow down. And so we can't ask questions. We can't restructure things.
Yeah,
we can't do any of that. And so what we're going to do instead is we're going to make an assumption that what works for us works for everyone. And you just got to suck it up.
Yeah.
And so women at this point learned that we just have to deal with it and we have to push through, even though something within every woman who
Right.
tries to operate in really anyway, big or small, within our world structures and economies and systems, we feel the dissonance within ourselves. We understand that it doesn't really work the same for us, but we may not fully understand why or how. And at the same time, we're being told from the outside, that's not true. This works for you too. And you're just either not good enough, not smart enough, too lazy, something is wrong with you, and you need to just suck it up and you need to work it out, because we're all doing it over here, so you can do it too. Because we're the same.
It's like the OG form of gaslighting. It's like the first version of it, right? Not, oh, let's think about this and let's curate our environments to better suit women's needs. Let's just tell them to not be inconvenient and force the peg in the round hole kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then we find ourselves here, which is now the age of data.
Yeah.
Like everything is built upon data. Data is king in this world. Data is what drives everything. And we have to understand that the databases that we currently have are very skewed male-centric.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about in health science. I'm talking about in all of these aspects that we're talking about, because remember, the data has been collected over
It makes total sense.
1,000 years or so, right?
Yeah.
And there's only a shorter time period where women made that full entrance into these spaces and started to be considered. But even to today, we're not considered in the same way. And there's a lot of misunderstanding around just the basics of how our bodies work, what the actual differences are between males and females, or if there are differences in certain aspects, like the brain, cognition, things like this, that we're now starting to understand there are significant differences. But that data is minuscule. We're talking about, like, if we wanted to think of all the datas within the world, all the data, what that would look like is maybe like a beach full of sand, and each pebble of sand is like a data point.
Yeah.
And we would have like a nickel size of sand. So like a pinch of sand would be the amount of data that is accurate on female bodies, on the way things are different and how they work for us. And so we're just in the infancy of understanding the differences and understanding the female body, and starting to insert that information into our policies, our structures, our infrastructures, our systems. And so it's a slow process, and we do have to have patience with it, because we're just getting started. But there are a lot of mistakes being made still, and that's where my job is, to start to point these things out and give a better way to move forward so that we can actually make progress.
Yeah. Wow, it's so cool. I'm so excited to get into the nitty-gritty of the differences that you're finding too. But I'm reminded, I love talking about this idea of the evolutionary hangover, that we evolved in very, very different times, and what was once adaptive in this modern context has become maladapted. And I never thought about it through this lens, of course, having not been a woman. But if the world was essentially built by men, of course, that's a hot topic, because the world was created by women and built by men, I guess you could say, that it's skewed the way we fundamentally like look at what progress is and all of that stuff. And it's funny you mentioned the sand analogy. That was the very image I had in my head, is like you girls have a little grain of sand and we have just this mountain of stuff, and it's time to play catch up, right? Yeah. So before we get into like you highlighting some of these glaring differences and opportunities, I'm very curious about what got you into this. It doesn't seem like something you just stumble into naturally. Were you lit up by, some kind of right to redemption, like some kind of story that got you interested in all of this stuff?
Yeah. So my entry into this world was definitely personally motivated. I watched the women, specifically within my family, really struggle with their health, with their mental health, and be let down time and time again by the systems. And it took kind of this crescendo moment in my life and in my mom's life where she had a major health crisis, and the health systems and her doctors and therapists and all of the people who are supposed to know what's good for her really let her down, and she kind of fell through the cracks. And that had also happened with my grandmother and my great grandmother. And it started to make me really question the systems and the structures. I was always in the health sciences in my educational path. At the time, I was studying to become a doctor of physical therapy. I was an undergrad, and that shifted me in a completely different direction when I wanted to better understand our health systems, our policies, our infrastructures, and the science to make a difference for women, specifically for my mom, for myself, and really for society, because I think our health systems don't necessarily work well for anyone. So at that point, I shifted gears and I ended up getting my master's in public health in epidemiology. And I went to work for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And I ended up, while I was there, I worked there for about 7 years. And I worked primarily on our emergency responses and global cardiovascular disease. While I was at CDC working on these global health initiatives, it became glaringly obvious that the idea of public health in and of itself is set up to fail. Because when you try to create something that covers the population in like a blanket approach, it fails every single time. It doesn't work, especially when it comes to health. And especially when it comes to different types of health, women's health, men's health, children's health, right? It's all different. But we try to create these policies and these protocols and these systems around health that are supposed to work the same for everyone, and they don't. This started to become very obvious for me. And specifically when I was working in global cardiovascular disease, I was setting up cardiovascular disease clinics in Mongolia, Brazil, and Africa. And in those clinics, we set up standardized protocols with the protocols for diagnosis and treatment of cardiovascular disease, specifically hypertension, but also to prevent cardiac events. And then we tracked all of those metrics. And what I saw after a couple of years of setting up these clinics and these practices, and the data started to come in, was pretty shocking and a big eye-opener for everything that we're talking about for me. And that was that the male patients, on average, on like a population level in each one of these countries, tended to improve in most of their cardiovascular metrics after applying the protocols. On the opposite side, the female population either didn't improve or sometimes got worse or had more cardiac events after implementing the same protocols that are supposed to work the same for everyone. So this started raising a lot of questions in my mind, and I started to get curious, why would it be different for men and women? Because that is not in alignment with what I've been taught all these years in the health sciences. So I started to go and look back. First, I started to look back into my epidemiology, biology, disease progression textbooks and try to understand more about the cardiorespiratory system and cardiovascular disease and these aspects that might be different between males and females. I couldn't find any text or teaching within this educational path that I had taken that mentioned any differences, any sex differences in the cardiovascular system.
Wow.
that for sure brought up some red flags, because I knew that there had to be differences and that they must have been mentioned somewhere along this path, but I just hadn't paid attention. But there weren't. And more shockingly to me, which maybe shouldn't have been a shock, but I just, again, wasn't paying attention as I was going through. I was just trusting the system and the knowledge that it was providing, is that all of the representations of the cardiovascular system within these medical textbooks were all the male model. The only time you ever see the male or the female model within our educational systems, our textbooks, any of the teachings around health, is when you get to the reproductive system. Yeah. That's the only time you see the female model being considered and being considered as different than the male model. So that was another alarm bell that went off for me. And the final piece that really kind of broke the camel's back, as they say, was I started to look back at the research that had gone into the development of these systems and protocols that we were putting into place for cardiovascular disease, which were all the best practices from the past 30 years of research with our partners. It was CDC, WHO, and ministries of health around the world. And the American Heart Association was involved, and all of the big players in cardiovascular disease were involved in this research over that 30-year period, and which is put into these protocols. So I started to look at the actual research, and I started way back from the research that began 30 years prior, all the way to the most current research that went into it, which was about 10 years prior to the protocols being developed. And all of that research was primarily male subjects. And when there were female subjects included, they were not aggregate. So the results of the study weren't reported by sex when there were females included. So it was all just combined together. But the vast majority were male subjects anyway. So of course the data is skewed that way. So it made sense that the protocols that we put in place worked pretty well for the male patients, but not as well for the female patients, because we don't have that understanding. We didn't do that research. So that was what kind of was the impetus for me to then shift gears and focus my PhD studies, which I was conducting at that time, exclusively on female bodies and female health. And that's where I am today. Wow. What was the biggest, especially initially when you got into that and you started to uncover this and the light bulbs were going off? I've heard you say something in the past, something along the lines of, I guess one of the mistakes that we make is, just like with the cardiovascular system, is assuming that because we have the same systems that they run exactly the same. So like a nervous system must be the same because we both have that, right? Reproductive, we can obviously separate because obviously men don't do that, women don't do this. But the assumption that, well, we have a cardiovascular system, so that must be the same. But then, I think about the effect of like hormones on certain things, and then you add in a cycle, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, of course not. What was the biggest just like smack in the face for you as you started to dive into all this? Yeah, well, that is the biggest difference. And that is what the glaring, obvious research is pointing to at this point, is that there are significant differences in all of these global physiological systems between the male and female body. And it's not because we have different parts. We have the same parts mostly. It's that those parts work differently in each one of these organisms. So this is where we get into the science of the biological rhythm, which is the big difference. And this is the hormones, the hormonal effect, the hormonal cascade, and how it affects differently males and females because it's a different one. So in the male body, the biorhythm, or the main biological pace that's occurring, that's driving everything from the cardiovascular system to the respiratory system to the musculoskeletal system, the brain, the nervous system, the reproductive system, all of it, the metabolism, all of it is driven primarily by the 24-hour circadian rhythm. And that's a 24-hour hormonal rhythm that happens within the male body and the female body, and we'll get to that. But in the male body, it's what drives everything else. It's what sets the pace for everything. So what that means is that from one day to the next, the male body and all those systems within it operate the same from day to day.
Consistent.
It's a daily repeating, very consistent rhythm and system in terms of a 24-hour period. What happens over a 24-hour period, there's a lot going on and a lot changing. That's the same case in the female body because we also have a 24-hour circadian rhythm and system. But that is not what drives all of those global physiological systems, again, from the cardiovascular system all the way to the nervous system to the metabolism. All those things in the female body are driven and set to the pace of the ovarian hormone cycle, because estrogen and progesterone have such profound effects on the female body globally, and they drive all of those systems operate. So it's a lot more complex because we still have that cortisol, melatonin, circadian driven rhythm that happens on a daily basis. And that rhythm is occurring, but that rhythm is overlaid onto the core driving rhythm, which is the ovarian hormone rhythm. And that affects that 24-hour rhythm, which looks different in the female body from day to day. It's not like the male body where it's a repeat, same. It's something happens, the next day, something a little bit different happens. The next day, something a little bit different happens. And then when you zoom out to that month-long view and you look at what's happening with the estrogen and progesterone rhythm in a normally cycling woman, or in an actively cycling woman, I should say, not normally cycling, because even not normally cycling women have the same thing. But what you see there is that at those significantly different hormonal checkpoints that happen throughout that month-long, 28-day-ish period of a woman's cycle, there are these 4 significant hormonal checkpoints that are so different from the other ones. And then when you look at all the physiological processes at those checkpoints, they're also very different. So that's what makes the understanding that women, and I joke about this because this is a little simplistic, but women are actually 4 different women over the course of a month, because we have these major hormonal shifts that happen throughout the month that change our global systems and how they all process, and make us into a different biological being with different needs, with different strengths, with different abilities, with different capacities at each one of these. Now, again, we look at our male counterpart and it's not the same. There's the same capacities, strengths, needs, abilities that happen for a male organism every day throughout the month. And the female organism does not have that same consistency. And so we're dealing with a much more complex system. And the problem that we've had with our science, with our policies, with our systems, with our infrastructures, is that we've tried to oversimplify things so that we can have an understanding and create something workable. But we can't do that with the female system because that's not the reality. And all we're doing is gaslighting and overriding and misguiding and harming women by telling them that they need to be consistent and the same every day, that they need, the same diet, they need the same exercise routine, they need the same training routine, they have to perform the same way every day, they have to have the same schedules every day. That does not work for women. And women know that, but we just don't have the opportunity granted to us to operate in a way that actually works for us and for our bodies.
It's so fascinating. There's so many avenues I want to go down here. I'm just thinking about, I think from the male perspective, that it's such a rudimentary understanding of what you just said, because I think we, especially if you've lived with a woman, I've been married now for 12 years, and it's funny, there's a meme going around social media right now that it's like, my favorite animal is ... And I was like, my favorite animal is my wife when she's ovulating. It's like the best ever.
Yeah.
But we see it, I think, kind of like high level as a psychological shift, but the downstream effects of that is very physiological too. And being with my wife for so long, actually just more recently, she finally weaned our youngest son after 2 and a bit years and went through a huge hormonal shift. And we was walking through this together, and she's like, yeah, I think I've dumped, or I'm significantly lower on oxytocin, I feel like, and I'm a different person right now. And I'm like, yeah, that must be difficult.
Person. Yeah. So layered on top of this monthly biorhythm complexity that we have to deal with just in our regular lives, women also have an additional layer of complexity, which is over the course of our lifetime, we also go through significant phases that change who and what we are. And so, you know, broad strokes, what those significant checkpoints are across the lifespan are, you know, puberty. And that's the same significance that males have when they go through puberty. But this is what sets that biological rhythm and pace for the females and sets the difference between males and females once you go through that puberty shift. Then at that point, women have a very long period, the longest period of their life or the longest phase of their life, that is their actively cycling years. And that's painted into different shades and colors depending on certain things, like if we use hormonal contraceptive, if we become pregnant at some point during that time, which then is another phase and a totally different biological being, the pregnant woman. Then the breastfeeding woman is a totally different being. And then the post-breastfeeding or post-birth woman is a totally different being. So we already, within that time frame, we have 4 different types of women that we are or may be. And then we go through perimenopause, which is a totally different being and time period. And then we go into menopause, right? Which is, again, a totally different time period and being. Each time we have to adapt our lives to align with the new biological being that we are, to our new biological needs, to our new skills and abilities and capacities.
All whilst not living in a world that's really catered to understand or empathize with that.
Yes.
It's like the Russian dolls is like the image I got in my head of like this constant shedding and rebirth and change and how crazy that is. And how, like you said women feel it. Maybe they don't have the proper understanding, physiologically what's going on, or even the words. Something I was always fascinated by is how little information women receive about understanding their own cycles, for example. And I think this is probably downstream of what you were talking about earlier with the research and the science largely being conducted by men. They're just like, oh, we don't understand that. That's complex. Complexity seems to be the issue here, right? When you was describing the two systems, men seem, at least on that, that rhythm piece, very simple, very consistent. And I imagine like a line, and our moving from that baseline is kind of like this. Whereas when I see that women's line that you're talking about, it could be huge swings and troughs and topsy-turvy things all up. So that complexity. In fact,
it's guaranteed to be.
It's guaranteed, right.
Yes. And from let's kind of take a scientific perspective just to understand why we are where we are in terms of the data and the research status. So even up to today, most research is conducted on male subjects, and that includes animal studies where we usually use male rats and lab animals. The reason why is because they are more simple. They're more consistent, they're more convenient, but the biggest thing is they're cheaper and quicker to study. When you study a female subject, if you do it properly, it will take significantly more time. You have to collect significantly more data because you have to account for all these different phases, not just the cycle phases, but the life phases. And you have to account for the variability across cycles. So really, for a study to be done properly with female subjects, if it's not at least a 3-month data collection to cover 3 cycles, it's not appropriate. And those results should be thrown out. How many studies are actually doing that?
Well, I know you said last year there wasn't even a single one, right? In 2025, there wasn't even a single study that met the gold standard for women's health initiatives.
Yes.
Why?
Exactly.
Wild.
So the research that is now being conducted where female subjects are being included, which there's more and more, it is improving in terms of an inclusivity perspective. But what the world is not understanding is inclusivity is only the surface level of the problem.
Yeah.
We can include female subjects at a 50-50 rate. We can include 50% male subjects and 50% female subjects in every study moving forward for the rest of time. And it would not solve our problem unless we actually conduct the research appropriately to accommodate for the important sex differences for each type of subject.
Yeah.
So the study protocols, the data collection systems, the methodologies, the statistical methods that we use, the reporting methods that we use are still all set to a male bias standard. This is what I'm now calling out. And I'm teaching folks, I'm teaching research institutions and governmental institutions about these critical sex differences and why the results of their studies are coming out to be invalid, misguided, and a lot of times harmful.
Yeah, I was going to say potentially
driving serious negative health outcomes for women. And, you know, you mentioned this before we started chatting, but there was a big moment this year that really brought all of this to the surface and brought it into the media. And there's starting to be a lot of conversations, which is great. But there's also a lot of mud that we have to work through because it's so convoluted and because the research has been done so poorly and there's so much unnecessary poor quality data out there that is really muddying the waters and creating all this confusion and argument when really there is no argument. If you look at the quality of the data, you understand that it cannot be considered or used. So about 30, 40 years ago, there was a landmark study initiated, a longitudinal study called the Women's Health Initiative study. And this was looking at the effects of hormone replacement therapy on cancer risk, amongst other things. What the early results of the study showed, and what was kind of grabbed by the media and sensationalized, was that hormone replacement therapy for menopausal women or perimenopausal women increased cancer risk, specifically breast cancer risk. Now we understand, now that that study has been fully conducted and the data has been cleaned and analyzed, there's still a lot of problems with that research and the way it was conducted. But even so, we are actually finding that hormone replacement therapy actually decreases cancer risk in women in most cases. It doesn't increase. And that in the cases where it did increase, it was based on the type of therapy, both the dose and the form and the way it was administered, have a significant effect on that. But overall, that hormone replacement therapy typically actually decreases cancer risk. But not only that, it decreases all mortality risk for women. So the problem and what happened, and to the detriment of women across the world, many lost their lives, many lost their livelihood, their health because of this one mistake, is that the FDA took this and created what we call black box warnings that they put on hormone replacement therapy. Now, this wasn't a ban of hormone replacement therapy. This was basically a warning saying that there are significant risks with this treatment, even though that was not warranted or necessarily true. So what that happened is physicians and research institutes and educational institutes and public health policy institutes took that and created protocols for women that excluded HRT, and it made it really difficult for doctors to prescribe this type of therapy for women. Most of them refused to because of the risk of being sued or the fear of negative health outcomes, of course. And so most women did not have access to this life-saving, life-giving therapy that is appropriate for a lot of women and can significantly improve their lives and health and protect their health through their older ages, weren't able to access this therapy for 20 years. Just this year, the FDA finally removed the black box warning and admitted that those were unwarranted and they were based off of false information that was poor quality research and data and something that was sensationalized in the media and not necessarily true. And with that admission, they really offered this admission of guilt of what I would say are crimes against women for the last 20 years. Unfortunately, us as women, yes, we could take this as a public apology, and that's fine. And yes, now the systems and the policies will change to now make these therapies more accessible to women, and that's wonderful. But what about the women who were harmed and fell through the cracks for the last 20 years? Nothing's going to make it up to them. And those losses are devastating. And this is just one aspect of women's health.
That's what I was thinking when you were saying that. The fallout must be so wide. And this is just one that's massive in our awareness now.
It happens again and again and again, and I see it every single day. And like you mentioned, over 2025, I analyzed over 1,000 studies, women's health studies, to see the quality of that research, to see if they were conducted appropriately, to see what amount of our data that we're getting from research that's going into our health systems and policies and protocols and development of drugs and treatments, what percentage of that is actually good quality data? And I expected to get a low percentage, but what I actually got was even shocking to me, which was a 0%. None of these studies hit all the most basic benchmarks to warrant high quality women's health research and appropriate and accurate results.
Wow. Now this is probably the $1 million question of what you're really trying to do is how do you change something like that? Like you said, this tension between the admission of guilt from the FDA, which is worthy of at least some accountability and celebrating that now we get to learn from our mistakes, hopefully, and not repeat them. But just because of the sheer momentum of the poor or complete lack of science, how do you actually change that? Is it funding? Is it awareness? Is it making a lot of noise? Is it a combination of many things? Like, where do you even begin?
It's a combination of many things, and much like women ourselves, it's a very complex, convoluted environment that we have to navigate, and we have to unravel a lot of things that are very tightly wound. And there are a lot of stakeholders involved. And so everyone is going to have to come to terms with the fact that we have not been doing the right research, that we don't have the right information, and that we have to rebuild new systems that will be appropriate for everyone. Which really just involves expanding the current systems to include the folks that are not currently included in it. So there's a policy aspect, there's a research and data aspect, there's an education aspect, and there's a top-down and bottom-up approach, right? Providing the information out to women themselves to understand it's not all in my head, I'm not making it up, these things are different for me. What can I start to do now to take ownership of that and start to educate those around me until the world catches up? And then there's the top-down approach,
Yeah.
which is where I focus most of
Yeah.
my attention, which is working with our governmental systems, both here in the US and around the world, working with our research institutions, researchers who do mean well. They just don't have the right guidance
Yeah.
and information and structures. And so we're working to provide those to them, to reform the policies and the systems so that we can start to have better quality research, better quality data, so that we can start to build better quality and more inclusive systems and structures and policies
Wow.
and protocols and treatments and innovations.
Yeah.
And so it's both, and all of these things working together, and it's a big effort. And so it's going to take a lot of us
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
global effort to make this happen. But I do see the tides changing, and I see a lot of interest in this space. And so it does make me very optimistic that we're going to see big positive change very quickly.
Yeah, it's incredible. You certainly didn't pick an easy problem to want to sink your teeth into, which is great, because I'm sure it gives you, I can tell when you speak, and there's a lot of passion in this. There's a lot of fire. There's a lot of, righteous indignation, rightly so.
Yeah.
And it's very cool. I'm curious, because I'm sure you must have thought of this. If you could kind of wave a magic wand and reverse this, fix this, it's 50 years down the line, whatever it is, what does it look like? What does the world that women inherit look like after acknowledgement of this? Better science, better understanding, better spaces. What would be the real world implications of that for women?
The real world implications aren't just for women.
Right.
They're for everyone. Because if you really think about it, you have 51% of the population, which is women, who are misguided, who are oppressed in many ways, who are not supported in the way that they need to be, who are most often not getting their needs met, who are not actually tapping into their full potential, and because they're dealing with these other illnesses or setbacks because of the misunderstandings, because of the misguidance. So if you take that half of the population and you actually give them the right support, the right education, systems that include them, and structures where they can be successful and to operate at their highest potential, it's like the great untapped potential of humanity is right there.
Yeah.
And so think of the new innovations that will occur when that half of the population is operating at even a 10% higher potential than what they currently are. Right? And it would be much more than that if we could actually have a world that allows women to operate in a way that is in harmony with their bodies, that is meeting their biological needs as they shift and change, and also supporting them to be healthier, have healthier children, have healthier families, right? At the center of most communities is women.
Yeah.
At the center of most families is women.
Yeah.
Women are responsible to birth the next generation from our body, which has to be healthy in order to do that. So it behooves all of us to put all of our efforts and attention onto these issues so that we can all move forward in the most productive way, which I put in air quotes because I know that that's still the most important thing in our current economy, and I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon, but this is the way to achieve that.
Yeah, aligned productivity. It's this is connecting so many dots for me as well, because I think about things that, I wrestle with or I observe, and I'm a podcaster and I live in the podcast space. So you see these themes of conversations repeating themselves, and ideas between like the battle of the sexes and the mating crisis, and the reproduction rate is at an all-time low, and population collapse. And I'm just thinking the whole thing, and it's because there is clearly something going on where men and women are not on the same page in all areas. They're not thriving, and they're kind of drifting apart as opposed to becoming these beautiful, I mean, I'm wearing the yin and yang on my shirt right now, these complementary opposites that need each other.
Yeah.
Like the battle of the sexes is not a war that any of us wants to win, because we both lose if we do.
Yes.
But we have to acknowledge some, it's not always an admission of guilt. I think sometimes there was a lot of ignorance there. We just didn't know what we didn't know. When we know better, we can do better. And I'm sure there was some power grabs and some strategic, devilish sides of the patriarchy, no doubt. But why wouldn't we want these things fixed? Because just personally and selfishly speaking, healthier, happier women in your life enhances the male experience profoundly. You are the creators of all life. Like literally, there is no future without women. And women that are thriving changes the world. I know it sounds dramatic, but it's not. It's the reality of that situation.
It is the most direct path to what we all want, which is a thriving society. We want thriving, healthy communities. We want a healthy future generation and generations to come. Easiest way is to focus on the bodies that have to carry those, to make sure, first of all, that they are healthy and supported to be able to do that. And then that those women who are the centerpieces of communities and families are, again, supported and healthy to do their job to the best of their ability, and whatever contributions that they want to make into the workplaces, into the families, into the communities, wherever it is where they want to focus their efforts, that they can do that in their highest potential, to fulfill their highest potential. And I'm not saying that all men are fulfilling their highest potential. There are societal human issues,
no doubt,
of course.
No doubt.
But we are doing a lot better for our male part of the population than we are for the female part of the population.
Yeah, no doubt. As you've been, uncovering more of the just observable, like you said, with the lack of science, the lack of understanding, it's not just that we don't know the best path forward for women. It's that in some instances it might directly be harmful because we're applying male treatments, I imagine, male dosing protocols, male supplement protocols, male medicine protocols. Have you identified any areas that seem to be more negatively impacted than other areas? Is this a bigger issue with, cardiovascular health, neurological health? Is there areas that really stand out that need some severe reforming, like immediately, or all of them?
Yeah, well, they all need reform, but the areas we want to prioritize where we're going to have our biggest impact and biggest wins, and then we can learn from those wins and we can move forward. So besides the fundamental issue, which is, first of all, we need to just study female bodies to understand fully how they work, because we still don't have that understanding here in 2026.
Wild.
We still don't have that understanding. So that's step one, needs to happen regardless. Then if we want to look at these different disease categories or these health outcome or the negative health outcomes for women, we look at the areas that are most affected. And really interestingly, but probably not surprising, is that 14 out of the 15 most underfunded disease areas most negatively, most significantly affect women disproportionately. Wow. So we're looking at areas like Alzheimer's, dementia. This more significantly affects the female population than the male population. But then you look at the research, and still the research in these areas are male-centered, male-focused, or they're just not getting attention at all. Another example is autoimmune disorders. This much more significantly affects females than males. It's a lot more rare in males than it is in females. This area is getting very, very little attention and funding, but it is exploding in the world, and it's significantly affecting all aspects of women's health, including reproductive reproductive mechanisms, right? And you said, there's this fertility issue happening across our population. This is a big aspect that we need to look at to really understand that and make a difference. So if we want to look at the areas where women are most negatively affected, we could reverse engineer that to and look at the current state of the science, what the funding looks like and support for these areas. And we can reform the way that we're doing the research and the way that the funding mechanisms work to drive more attention to the areas that need the most attention and will have the biggest impact.
Wow. I heard, I think it was Arthur Brooks recently, he said this statement. It's just been sticking in my head that psychology is physiology, or physiology is psychology. They're intricately connected. And, hearing you call out some of those issues that are neurodevelopmental, neurocognition. And I learned from another guest when we had a conversation about menopause is, I think we've had the assumption that women, quote unquote, have it better because they live longer. They've got longer average lifespans than men. But the way the fall off after menopause in particular, which also connects back to this lack of hormone replacement therapy and all the fear is bad. It's really bad. And they get hit with this stuff later and later. And we can't support them in the way that they need, either psychologically or physiologically, because we're shooting in the dark essentially, which is really quite crazy when you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, menopause represents a very large portion of a woman's life.
Yeah.
And again, it's another being that we have to understand, study, and learn how to support properly. Only one aspect is HRT, but there's also different ways that the life of a woman post-menopause is going to need to function to be optimal for her. We don't understand what those needs fully are because we're not studying these groups of women to understand what they need, how their bodies work, what are these big differences that occur, and what can be mitigated with HRT safely, and what is not meant to be mitigated and is meant to be adapted to.
And even just the conversation to prepare psychologically, prepare men also to live with women that are going to go through this. There's a term, I forget, it's like the gray something, but statistically speaking, it's the most likelihood for that divorce period is because a woman has essentially had the rug pulled from under her feet, metabolically speaking and hormonally speaking, and the man is like, who is this woman I'm living with? And they're not connecting the same way because they don't have the tools. He doesn't have the tools. They don't have the support physiologically, psychologically. But it's one of those things that no one's really having a conversation about, and all of a sudden we hit our mid-40s or whatever it is, and then we're in it, and it's just chaos, and there's nowhere to turn, there's nowhere to look. You've been going into doctors' offices over the last 10 years and saying, can I get help? And mostly men doctors saying like, oh no, you just gotta have some night sweats and you'll get over it. Just see you later.
Yeah, exactly. 10 years ago, the word menopause was very taboo, especially in workplaces. You did not say anything about menstruation or menopause in a workplace. Like, that was just a big no-no. These are the realities. Half of your workers, most likely, are going to be dealing with either menstruation, menstrual cycles, or menopause on a regular basis within your workplace. That is going to affect your workplace, whether you like it or not. So,
and they could get pregnant, and then they might need to leave for a bit.
That's a whole other being that we certainly don't understand. And the issue with pregnancy is that these women are protected class, which is an excuse to be lazy, to not do the research on them, because we can call ethical issues too risky to study these women. And so we just don't, where there is safe ways to study pregnant women. But it takes a lot more effort and understanding and time and care and resources in order to do it. So instead of doing that, we're like, oh, no, for your sake, we're not going to study you because we don't want to cause any harm. You have to find the balance between the two. Yeah.
But here's a little carrot on the end of the stick. At least you get your paternity leave. That's good enough, right? We've done enough. And it's like, probably not.
If they get maternity leave.
Yes, which is a big question.
Which is a big thing in the media right now. And also menstrual leave is another big thing in the media right now. That is seems to be a radical idea. But in 50 years from now, it'll be like, I can't believe we didn't have that in every single workplace. That's insane.
How do you think the workplace could shift again if we could wave the magic wand? I've heard you say in the past that kind of forcing this consistency when inherently the woman's physiology is not consistent. It's kind of changing all the time, and forcing that and just basically saying you have to show up on this very masculine clock Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, never drop in performance. That leads to enormous burnout for women, right?
Oh, it leads to burnout in 9 cases out of 10.
Yeah.
I experienced it personally. I don't know a single woman who works in the corporate world or in the regular 9 to 5 environments of the workforce that is not dealing with significant burnout at this point. And that's pretty scary too, because if we look at what's happening across the world, is women, this is kind of coming to a culmination point. Really, since COVID, it got really a lot more pronounced, but it has been happening slowly and progressing more and more over the last 20 years, which is women are starting to burn out or opt out of the workforce. And so we see this massive exodus of women from the workforce right now across the globe. And it is a major economic issue that the world is taking note of and trying to create systems and structures to prevent this bleed that they have, to try to, close the gaps and clog the leaks.
Stop the bleeding.
Yeah. And that's where the birth of the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement happened, but that was very misguided.
Yeah.
And it was more of a surface level check the boxes than actual making any structural changes that would both retain and promote women into
incentivize them back.
Yeah. Because the workplaces were too rigid and had a structure that did not support the female body and way that we operate. And it's still that way to this day, because we work on a 9 to 5, 5 days a week structure, at least here in the US, but most places work in the same way. And so women are not tolerating this anymore. And they're either leaving the workforce completely, or they're going off to find something that they can do that provides the flexibility for them.
Yeah.
Whether it's starting their own business and becoming an entrepreneur, or working remotely where at least they can kind of structure their schedules in a different way. And all of that is wonderful and beautiful. And that's why I mentioned COVID, because that kind of created these opportunities for women to have more flexibility. So this is the key. We need more flexibility within our systems and structures to expand them to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
We don't need to just check the boxes of putting more women there, putting more women there. They're not going to stay. And that's proven over and over.
Yeah.
They'll leave. Like that's a very temporary solution that's going to fail every time. We need to create a way for women to advance into the leadership positions that they want them to, and be able to contribute their unique skills and abilities and capacities in a feminine way that is different than the way that their masculine counterpart might operate. And we need to create the environments that actually support their well-being and their thriving.
Yeah, the incentives aren't aligned right now. And that's why you've got these panic terms being thrown around, these initiatives that aren't really actually doing anything. They're just shiny objects to distract. Because if it actually was warmer and more inviting and more in sync with more flexibility, you would actually find people willingly not feeling like, because I'm sure the women that are dropping out it's amazing because they do have options, and maybe they are highly educated and they're built a certain way. How many women would drop out if they had the chance and if they could? Probably most of them, because they feel exactly what you're describing. So they're kind of held hostages also by these jobs, which is causing further psychological decay. They're literally becoming one of these people we talk about where they're working to live this job that they feel like is slowly killing them, but they don't have another option. And if we could just get in and just change that, it just relieves so much of that burden. We've still got to work, we've still got to do that, but it's not this, we're not at war with ourselves. We're not like a polar bear dropped in the the Amazon jungle. You're just not adapted for that environment, and it's just not going to work long term.
Exactly. And the pieces that need to change that will cause the biggest improvement are actually not really complex. It starts with education and awareness and expanded flexibility.
Yeah.
If we could just do those two things, we will
big.
see a massive shift across the world on all of our pain points that we have as a human society.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's probably because, I guess, typically speaking, the average organization at the top of the chain is ran by a man who is applying his approach of like, well, we don't need more flexibility again, so why should they? But can't see it through that lens and is rigidly attached to this idea of productivity. So if you break the 9 to 5, which is burgeoning all of this productivity apparently, then you lose that. Not realizing that if you actually created more flexibility for the women in your workforce, they'd probably be way more productive, being able to work less in a way that doesn't destroy them in the process and make them leave after 5 years anyway because they hate it.
Yeah. Well, and think of how grateful, I know I can speak for myself, if I had the opportunity to work in corporations or organizations as I was coming up in my career that offered me the flexibility, I would be so grateful and be healthier and happier that I probably would have never left.
Yeah, right.
I was forced out because I was working within structures that did not work for me, that were burning me out and making me not able to bring my, unique flavor of brilliance that I bring to my work fully because I was sick. And so it kind of squeezed me out. And now I'm out here doing it in my own way, in my own structures. And I'm very happy. I would never go back at this point. But had I been provided an environment that was supportive, I would have stayed forever.
Yeah. Funny that, right? I mean, it's really cool that you've been able to personally alchemize it. Something like your pain has become your purpose. And now you can actually try to, send some ripples ahead forward so that changes for other people. But, you said something there. I'm curious. How do you embody these philosophies for yourself? You're out here, you're trying to make a pretty big impact in the world. I'm sure it becomes at times where it's really busy and it's like, oh my God, how am I going to get all this done? Whilst also honoring yourself, whilst also honoring your own natural rhythms and your cycle. How have you found balance in that? Yeah,
it's still hard because I face the same challenges that all women face, whether I'm working in an organization or for myself. I have greater flexibility and control over my schedule, but I don't have full control, especially because I still have to fit into the economic structures that we're working with and the priorities that we have as a country, as a globe, right? Yeah. And that's not going to change probably within my lifetime. So there are adaptations that I have to make, and then there are certain things that are within my control that I do my best to honor. Yeah. And so that can look like scheduling certain things, like a podcast recording at a time that's going to be optimal within my cycle, within my hormonal rhythm, where my cognitive capacities are going to be aligned with that activity. To the best of my ability, right? To the availability of the others involved and all of that. So it's a big puzzle that I work with, that my team also has full access to my personal cycle information so that they can help me put the puzzle pieces together. That's cool. And I have access to their cycle information, the ones who are women, which most of them are. And we share that with each other. And so we create kind of this harmonious working environment where we're always in consideration of each other's needs and also capacities. How are you going to work your best at this particular activity? Well, I know if I ask you to do this task at this time when you just don't have the biological capacity to do that, it's not only going to make that not work as well as it needs to work, and so everybody fails or is harmed, but you're not going to be happy, and then I'm going to be frustrated as well. So if we can actually take that into consideration, it starts to, like you said, improve the productivity of everyone. As much as I don't love that productivity is our really only goal, that's not my favorite concept, and it's definitely not my most important goal, but that's the reality of our society, and we are more productive in a way that also helps to keep us healthy when we can consider our bodies and our basic biological needs and how those might shift and change over the month, over our lifetimes.
It's very cool. I love that perspective. I love that you do that. I think it's really practical is what it is. It's really considerate. It's smart. And I think it's just, it's like not in people's awareness to do that. And I'm thinking what's also highlighted in that is that we need the tribe. You know, we need our people to know these things about us. And now I think about bringing it back into the homes, for example, and from the male perspective, what would you say that men can do to support the women in their lives, to honor these cycles? Like what do you wish more men even knew about a cycle and ways that they might show up differently to honor the partner in that?
Yeah, if they could just try to gain a even basic understanding of the female cycle. As we've talked about, there's still a lot that we don't know about the full picture of what the female body looks like, how it works, and those differences. But we do know quite a bit about the menstrual cycle, and we do know quite a bit about these different hormonal phases that we go through our lifetimes, and how the effects of estrogen and progesterone change the way that we operate, the way that we understand, the way that we might need to fuel our bodies and so on. And so you don't have to understand all of that, but if you could at least understand that there's this constant shift happening, and maybe some of the aspects of those kind of big, broad strokes, those changes that occur in each one of the phases across the menstrual cycle, and then in each one of the phases across the lifetime, then at least you could have more compassion, more empathy, more understanding of what your female counterparts might be experiencing, and help them to feel more supported. Yeah, that's right. I think, some good honest reflection of just any man listening, how, if something surprised you for that day, maybe you love your morning workout and you can't get it for whatever reason, like how much of a moody bitch you turn into. Now imagine that combined with this thing you could never understand, and trying to settle into that, like, oh yeah, it might be very, very difficult. And I think so much in our lives of what gets us in trouble is expectations, like expecting somebody to be the same all the time, when it's inhumane to them to expect them to be that, and to just acknowledge that there's change. And it's a good practice for you in your own mindfulness to release your attachment to what this person should be or how they should show up for you right now, to honor the cycles, to honor the change, to honor growing old together and everything that comes with that. You're going to change too, but your wife, your partner is going to go through some pretty profound changes as well, like ones that are going to change. Not, they're going to look the same and they're going to say the same things, but they're going to be going through quite a rapid change, and you've got to be there for all of that and to support them through it. I think is it's a gift, honestly. It is a gift. And, the one thing that we're guaranteed in this lifetime, in this world that we live in, is change.
Yes.
And that's going to be constant. Change is going to be constant. And that's within all biological beings. That's within our world itself. That's just what evolution is in and of itself. And we're evolving through time every day, right? And the amount of change that each one of us experiences is what's different. In the female perspective, change is what's constant and consistent. In the male perspective, consistency is more of the experience, and change is more of the experience in the female perspective experience. And so if we can just kind of try to wrap our brains around what that means as how we operate in society and how we relate to each other, I think just that understanding could really change the dynamics between men and women, but also between all people. Yeah.
This is very cool. It's fascinating. I want to, keep my finger on the pulse and keep observing this and keep having conversations like this, because I always just think whenever I become aware of something, what can I do to support it? And this is one of the avenues. I think this is a really fun conversation. I think it's really powerful what you're doing. I think it's really important. I think it could be world-changing, life-changing for many people. And it's just so interesting that it's not been given the respect, reverence that it deserves up until now because of this complexity issue, which is kind of funny because obviously the more complex it is, the more wise it is, the more naturally intelligent it is, the more answers it probably holds for all of us if we can actually start to figure that out. That's exciting.
That's the point. That is the whole point. If perhaps we would have started with her to begin with, the more advanced, more complex, more sophisticated biological being, if, let's just kind of rewrite history.
Yeah.
If women were the landowners, if women were the educators and teachers and scientists primarily, if women led the Industrial Revolution, if women created our modern economies and societies, what would that look like?
Wow.
That actually might hold a lot of the answers to our issues as a humanity, and it might hold some of the answers to health issues that not just affect women, but all biological beings, because if you study and master the more complex version, then it's reasonable to assume that the more simple version fits within that.
Yes. But not the other way around.
But not the other way around.
Whoa, that's a fascinating reframe.
Yeah.
That's really cool to play with. Yeah. I heard this idea recently. It was from an old psychonaut, funnily enough, but I love hearing him speak. He's got a funny voice, Terence McKenna, and he was talking about, the nature of reality is just such a trip, and anybody that pretends to know what's going on is just, fingers pointing at the moon is not the moon and all of that. And he says, if there is anything like an intelligent form, God, if you want to call it that, it seems to be that its organizing principle is for increasing complexity. That's what it's done since the dawn of time, is get more and more and more complex. And here we are having the conversation at the end of this chat about the most complex thing potentially in our entire existence, the woman, the creator of all life.
Yes.
That we're just beginning to nick the surface of understanding that level of complexity. And maybe it holds the keys to the answers that have been, we've been wrestling with for a lifetime. And that's really wonderful, really fascinating.
Yeah. This is actually the core concept of my book that will be coming out later this year, which is the working title is We Should Have Started With Her.
Wow. I can't. I'm gonna have to sit with that one to try and imagine what that world would look like. It's proposed sometimes. I've read some cool, like dystopia, utopia novels, and like one world is contrasted as the kind of patriarchal system that we live in, and one is this more utopian, more egalitarian, more feminine. And I don't push back against that at all. I know there's probably some hard charging, like, no, women should be trad wife, maxes, and all of that stuff. Like, whatever. I just say, look around. Is what we're doing working?
No. I don't think we need to go further down the path that we're already on.
Right.
I think we need to get off this one completely and get on a new one. And it doesn't mean we need to go into a world where women are the landowners and run the economy.
Yeah.
We don't need to flip to the extreme the other way. But we do need to make sure that there's a lot more balance and that both men and women feel the same level of support and opportunity and understanding. And right now, that's where there's just this major imbalance.
It's massive. And it's hard to ignore. You can't, if you're choosing to ignore it, you're willfully denying it. And I think you're right. It seems like we've been on this track for a while, and everybody can kind of feel, there's a feeling in the air right now that we just watch everything that's going on, the division, the hate, the continued blowing each other up. And it's a lot of dudes doing that. And I wonder if we could get more, feminine touches and women's voices in there and just different perspectives, and to balance that yin and yang again, like we said, because it's clearly over-dominated by now by the dominator culture. It's another Terence McKenna term. He called it the dominator culture. And that's what it feels like, right? Yeah. It's like a lot of dominator power, like subversion over land, like taking it, not worrying about the consequences. Now we're eating them.
I say, the patriarchy, we gave it the good old college try, and that's great. And let's take our learnings and create something better now. Let's not recreate the same problems, and let's not go further down this path that we already know is not working. There's an interesting concept about the critical tipping point. And it's that it takes about 30 to 35% of a critical mass to start to create real change. So if you think about this in the context of like the way that the world works and who the world leaders are, which is, 99% male, Let's just imagine like the world's leadership is a boardroom, and we have a man, and maybe a woman or maybe two women sitting at the table. What we find statistically is that the people who are the different one, so whether it was like blue, yellow, right? We have 90% blue and 10% yellow, which is still like not even where we are globally. We're less than that. But until yellow reaches at least 35%, no actual change can happen by them being there, by those different perspectives being there. So those different ideas and perspectives are essentially useless or powerless until they surpass that critical mass. We would love to see it get to somewhere close to 50-50. And that's where you would really see massive, massive changes in the entire world in every single structure and system. We're nowhere near that. What we could try to achieve and aim towards, though, is that 30 to 35% to start to make those actual changes. Right now, what we see is tokenism. And we see, again, it's all linked in with the failed diversity, equity, and inclusion movement, where it was more of tokenism. It was just, let's just make it seem like we're making a difference, but we're really not, because there's nowhere near that critical mass being met. Yeah. So if we could look into our world's powers, whether it's economic or governmental or social, societal, right? And if we could see at least 35%, we'd want to try to hit that benchmark first of women in those seats, we would see a massive difference. And that would also be able to adjust for any outliers, because just like there are outliers with men, there are with women, right? There can still be a woman in power that would make poor choices, but once you reach a critical mass, you're going to see more of a female perspective generally, and what's naturally aligned with the female experience, rather than these, outliers that are extremist. Yeah. Wow. I think that's a wonderful place to bring this one into land. And kudos to you, Kayla, for tackling this head on, not being, they say I guess in this case, it would be the woman in the arena, not the person, not the man in the arena, and not the person you just, hurling insults from the cheap seats, but actually in there with, the dust on your knees and the bloody cheek sometimes from taking the licks, but being in there and trying to make a difference. It's really wonderful, and it's been a very fun conversation. Thank you. Where can people go to keep up with everything that you're up to learn about you? I know you've got her Biorhythm courses and touch points and everything that you're just trying to create. Where's the best place to go? Yeah, for those who are interested to learn more about the female body and biorhythm and how that works, either for yourself or for the women that you work with, you can go to herbiorhythm.com, and I have several opportunities to work with me and my team there to learn some of these core concepts. And if you want to learn more about my policy work and some of these bigger global initiatives in women's health, I have also some information there through my nonprofit organization, Women's Health Science Leaders. And you can just click on that link on the website and learn more about what we're doing. And you can also send an inquiry if you want to get involved or volunteer or donate to these efforts. I love it. You heard that. That was a call to action. Get out there, participate, share it, follow. It's very important. These are, like you said, that top down meeting the bottom up. This is a part of the bottom up. Let's get this out there. Let's talk about it. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you so much. We'll run it back one day soon, and we'll have a lot more understanding of the complexity. Yes. And we'll just continue to peel the layers of the onion and see how deep we can go. Thank you, Kayla. That sounds great. Thank you so much. All right, you lot. We will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. All right, friends. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.